This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Sound Porter Mastering, OWC, Atom Audio, API Audio, JZ Microphones, Spectra 1964, and Isotope. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now through the JZ Pop Filter on the JZ BB29 microphone, through the Spectra 1964 STX600 mic pre-complementer, and Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G SSD. So get ready to rock.
With an 8-channel lunchbox, the lunchbox has a DB25 connector, so you can go DB25 out of the lunchbox, DB25 into the box console without a bunch of patch cables. One single cable will give you 8 channels at a time. So you absolutely can have a whole bunch of mic pre's on the line side of the console and do a multi-channel recording down to stereo, on the fly.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Whether you're in the studio or working remotely, the Envoy Pro FX from OWC lets you record from anywhere with confidence, pushing USB technology bandwidth to the max of 2,800 megabytes per second over Thunderbolt. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for the road, the OWC Envoy Pro FX is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Find the new Envoy Pro FX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. JZ Mics brings you the ultimate futuristic pop filter for your studio, built from solid metal parts that won't break and a flexible gooseneck for easy placement. The JZ Pop Filter uses a unique waveguide design that prevents plosives from getting through to the mic while allowing important high frequencies for clarity. Plus, it looks super cool and you're hearing my voice on it right now. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off this amazing pop filter from jzmic.com.
When I master a song, I'm immersed and committed to a sonic fidelity from start to beyond finished. Hi, I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. My goal in every master is to help you prepare so that you're not compromising your timeline, budget, or your mix. My iterative process helps build a relationship with you so that you don't have to ever second-guess your mix. Let's pull back the curtains on mastering because there's no secrets here. Send me your mix and I'll give you free feedback or a free mastered demo. Just hit me up at soundporter.com.
Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Larry Droppa, the owner and president of API. Since 1999, when he acquired the company at auction. He and two friends launched ATI, the live console company, in 1988, positioning that company's Paragon console as the premier live sound mixing tool for many years. After adding Uptown Automation in 1995 and then API in 1999, Larry's quest for audio manufacturing notability had been satisfied. He spent the first half of his professional career as a live mixing engineer, progressing from a local bar band to a small regional sound company to one of the larger live sound companies in the U.S. Larry has toured with folk groups, orchestras, pop and rock bands, and spent an ear-splitting 6 weeks on the road with the band listed in the 1984 Guinness Book of World Records as the loudest band in a performance. I'm going to have to ask you later, Larry, what band that was. But the highlight of his live mixing days is unquestionably the 12 years that he spent mixing in-ear monitors for Stevie Wonder. Stevie was an early adopter of in-ears, and Larry developed both high-quality in-ear monitors as well as a unique wireless transmission system during that time. With the purchase of API Audio, Larry had to pivot to become familiar with the studio environment and its inherent differences. Hard work and a team of dedicated audio professionals rebuilt the API brand into the acknowledged powerhouse that it is today. The entire range of API products remained firmly dedicated to co-founder Saul Walker's original ideas and designs. A statement on Larry's passion for the music business can best be summed up in the words of a Stevie Wonder song, Sir Duke. Quote, music is a world within itself with a language we all understand, with an equal opportunity for all to sing, dance, and clap their hands. Quote. That's great. I love that. It's an honor to have the fearless visionary leader, Larry Droppa, keeping the legendary API sound alive and well, joining us today. So please welcome Larry Droppa to Recording Studio Rockstars. Larry, are you ready to rock, my friend?
I am ready, Lidge.
Man, it's great to have you here on the show. It's a real honor to, you've done such an incredible thing with API, and to just have you to hanging out with us today is pretty awesome.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, so, I essentially, in all transparency, was reading, your own bio and story back to us to introduce you. But tell us more in your own words, how you got interested in this stuff, and, give us a brief outline of your entrance into audio and pro audio and acquiring API.
Well, I've certainly always enjoyed music from a young age, and eventually developed an interest in electronics and fixing stuff. I like to take electronics apart in the early days, not knowing the first thing about it. And it eventually went to school and got a 2-year degree in electronics technology, and worked in a service shop for a while and a little small 8-track recording studio in upstate New York. And made friends with a band that had come from my high school. The guys were a couple of years older than I, and their house engineer had the good sense to let me learn a few things about mixing audio by experimentation, and sort of found my place, and worked with that band for a while, and then had the opportunity to work with a small regional sound company where you did one-offs and short tours, and it really fell into my into what I really felt comfortable doing, which is going on the road and living in a tour bus and those kinds of
Nice.
things. It was it's the equivalent of running off and joining the circus.
Yeah, and where were you located at that time?
At that point, it was upstate New York and near Syracuse.
Okay. Yeah, and so what? Now I know that your introduction was through the live stuff, and then you talk about acquainting yourself with the studio environment. Mm-hmm. Were there studios there, and were you sort of intrigued by the studio scene too, or was running away with the circus is a pretty good idea. It's pretty fun.
Yeah. I had some exposure to. There was a studio in Ithaca, New York that this band I worked with recorded, and then I worked in a service shop for a little 8-track recording studio, which was big deal at the time to me. But I didn't spend the time in the studio to learn studio techniques, because I sort of gravitated toward the spontaneity and the aspect of live sound where the band is playing and you get it right as you fly. Mm-hmm. Whereas looking back on it, I was young and stupid, of course, but it seemed like that studio engineers could be a little lazier and take their time, and if things didn't go well, you could just stop tape and do it over again. Whereas in the live world, the band is playing, the crowd is listening, and if you don't get it right, you just kind of toss it off and go, "Oh, I missed that cue," and on you go. You hit the next one.
Yeah, you smile. You give them a big smile.
And my theory of mixing live sound, at least from front of house perspective, it's a little different in monitors. But from front of house, if 51% of the audience likes the show, you've done a great job.
Nice.
Because there'll always be somebody who wants to complain. They're the guitarist's girlfriend or something. So the guitar is never loud enough. But if you please a greater than 50% of the audience, you've done your job.
Well, as long as the guitarist's girlfriend doesn't suggest that you remix it in doubly, I think you'll be okay.
Exactly right. Exactly.
So now one of the things that pops into my head is just that discovery too, when you're doing mixing audio through, in a live situation, you've got analog signals coming through a console and getting mixed down. And then it's going to the PA, or maybe it's being captured as a 2-track mix too. And then when you hit the studio and you're breaking things out to multi-track, now you've got analog signals getting printed on tape and then played back through the console. Do you remember being struck? Well, let me back up a sec. I was struck in the digital age at how much of a sound difference there could be, a purity of sound when you go through the console straight down to 2-track, versus sometimes, it's different when you record it multi-track. Do you remember noticing that? And were you struck by that as well? Or is that just me and my weird OCD?
Yeah, I don't think in the early days I have a recollection of a difference in between a live performance and a recorded multi-track performance. Although I do recall at an AES show when the first Sony CD players were manufactured, and putting on a pair of headphones, and the person from Sony, pushes the CD button, and I heard nothing, because you always heard heard the needle in the groove, and then all of a sudden I heard a symphony, and it was such a contrast between. To me, it was dark and light.
Yeah,
because dark was nothing, and all of a sudden the symphony was playing.
So real increased dynamic.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, back then, you'd get your CD and then you'd flip it over and it would say, like ADD or AAD or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember being pretty excited if it was all Ds, which now, of course, I'd also be really excited if it was all As,
Right. Yeah. We've come full circle on that idea, because now we know how bad those early CDs actually sounded.
Yeah. So now you did a lot of live sound, and then one of the credits in there, you talked about working with the loudest band ever. And I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but there was
sure did.
A great chapter about a band that was so loud they had to play with remote controls while orbiting the planet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe we didn't mention the band name for a good reason, but what were some of the things that you felt like you learned when you were on the road about sound and, why it was important to you?
Well, you learn a lot about dynamics, of course. Louder is not necessarily better. The purpose of a live sound performance, I eventually learned, is not to put up as many speakers as you can and turn them up as far as you can.
Unless it's my guitar solo, right?
Yeah, right. Or if I'm personally involved with some person in the band who slept me at 20, then you get a little louder.
Then louder's better.
Right. But you learn about dynamics, and that's probably going a few years past that into my days of mixing Stevie's in-ear monitors. That's really where the impact of dynamic range and softness to loudness really became something that impacts the performance. It became obvious at that point how you can be really quiet and really have an impact.
Yeah, well, that must have been a huge education working with Stevie, because here's somebody who's incredibly advanced with their, musicality and their understanding of performance and all these things.
Mm-hmm. And he truly taught me to listen better, because he would, in my early time with him, he would say, something like, more piano, or bring up the low end of the bass a little bit. And I would do that, and I would go, because I listened to my in-ears were the same as his, so that I had the same, reference quality. And so I'd make a change, and I go, yeah, that is better. I like that. And so it taught me to listen more for, the spaces in music and in a live performance. Because in his case, there were times we had 72 microphones on stage feeding a stereo mix into his ears.
Wow, that's a lot of mics.
Yeah, and you got to be dynamic about it, because it can't all be. Can't all be up. They can't all be the highlight of the mix at that point in time.
Yeah, good point. So then the mixer really plays a huge role in the sound of that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so then tell us about ATI live consoles. Now, was that a console that you designed yourself? What's the story with that? And then what's the connection between API and ATI sounding so similar as an acronym?
Well, that certainly wasn't intentional. Two friends and myself started ATI to manufacture live sound consoles. That was the business plan. And I well, two of the three of us. One was the design engineer, so he actually designed the console, and the two others of us had worked just about every console that was made at that point in time. So we had a good idea of what we liked and didn't like about various live consoles, and made the Paragon to be, the truly the Paragon, the top end of the technology that was available at that time.
I feel like that was a really important word back then too. I remember we had like Paragon Park was the amusement park near us too. And what era was this too? This was
that was 88.
88.
We started in 88. So by 1990, we had consoles out on the road. One of the first tours we put a Paragon on was the Steve Miller tour.
Oh, cool! Right on.
And then not long after that, we were on moved our way up through Dolly Parton, and then we were on a U2 right after that.
Okay, and then I may get the chronology of things incorrect. Hopefully not. But you got into automation as well, and then got into API.
Yes, yeah, I had the opportunity to purchase Uptown Automation, which was a company out of Colorado that did retrofit fader and mute automation systems for other consoles. Pretty much any console you could put an automation system into, and so we folded that into ATI, and then in '99 had the opportunity to acquire API. Which created a couple different confusing series of letters there that were very similar. So people confused API or ATI. You answer the phone, people weren't sure what you were talking.
Well, at least you didn't have to change the initials very much. You could have just put a little circle on the T and keep it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, of course, you've evolved automation too, and I think is Final Touch is that sort of bring us up to the most recent?
Absolutely, yeah. It's an iteration of Uptown Automation. Eventually, the market for retrofit automation went away due to digital consoles and all. But we kept the automation, the core of that, and it evolved over time into Final Touch as it is today, and pretty much only goes into API consoles.
Yeah, and then looking on the website, sort of the history of API, I think it mentioned that in as far back as 1974, API had, and I guess that would have been Saul Walker at the time, coming up with one of the first computer programmable consoles, automation of EQ, sends, pans, and faders, and all that.
Yeah, it was again and I credit Saul Walker, but there were certainly some other engineers who helped along that time, created some of the very first automation systems that ran on an extra track of your tape. So it took a track of the tape machine. That they pioneered some of the very earliest conductive plastic faders.
Right. Yeah, I remember that was cool to see that.
They made some of the first quad panners that fit into when quad records were the thing. API made quad panners so that a console could output a quad, 4 tracks.
Well, so it's interesting to hear about this idea of conductive plastic faders. I mean, we take faders so for granted now. Even if you're in a computer, you see a picture of a fader there, and to realize that before the conductive plastic fader, there were faders, but I think they were only I have a very old custom-built MCI board that has stepped connections. So each increment of volume would have been a connection. But the idea of conductive plastic, I mean, it just opened up this whole world of possibility.
Yeah, it sure did. Yes.
You may already know that iZotope creates the very best smart plugins for mixing and mastering. But did you know that now you can get them all through iZotope's new affordable subscription bundles? Get Music Production Suite Pro for only $24.99 per month, or Producers Club for only $19.99 per month. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now, or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 complementer, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. But what if you want to record direct keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the stereo BBDI 2 with custom wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad at spectra1964.com. All right, let's see. What else should I ask you about? Now, something else that I thought was really cool. The first mention on the timeline of the history of API was the console being sold to Apostolic Studios in New York. But what I really enjoyed was it was 1967, which is when I was born.
That's that right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting fact with that was the first console that API made, custom made, and installed in the studio. But a couple of years ago, I read the Steven Tyler book. I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's something like, Does the Music in My Head Bother You? Which is a great title. But in that book, he talks about going to New York and going to a studio with some friends of his who had a booked date in a studio, and they went to Apostolic Studios.
That's cool. I don't really know anything about Apostolic Studios myself. I don't know if you know much more about it. You want to talk about it now? If not, that's fine. We can keep moving. But
I know very little about the actual studio.
Okay. All right, dig it. So let's see. There was also a question that I think Mark Rubel was asking me about. He was mentioning very early API, wanting to know when it started and talking about it was early, it had to do with creating automation for theater or something like that. Was that right?
That's the actual, the proper, if you will, name of API is Automated Processes Incorporated. And the first, or one of the first paying gigs that API had when the company was formed was manufacturing a controllable or repeatable setting for a theater curtain. Because theater curtains, you open the curtain, sometimes the curtain part, sometimes it just opens left to right. Other times, there's, if you've been to the Met Opera or something, the curtain kind of bows itself up. And there used to be, you'd haul those things up on a pulley and rope system, and the stagehands would have to mark either paint or tape on the rope if you wanted to say open the curtain halfway, or if you wanted to go 3/4. And sometimes productions called for opening the curtain partially, so you'd have to go as far as the tape said and stop. Well, maybe the left and the right side didn't go the same or whatever. Anyway, so API manufactured a system. It's a complex system of motors and relays where you could push a button and say open the curtain halfway, and the curtain would open halfway and stop, or 3/4 or whatever. So
that's cool.
Automated Processes was directed towards a theater curtain, not necessarily recording studio microphones.
So, my first gig, other than, waiting tables or something like that, I was a licensed movie projectionist in the 80s, and we had a red velvet curtain, but I had to hold my thumb on the button until it was open all the way. So I would have appreciated having one of those automated, an API curtain at the time,
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, and it's just interesting to think that it's all about solving problems. So you're either opening curtains or you're, figuring out how to provide automation for people, like you said, when it's not retrofitted anymore. Now we're moving forward and creating new products. What, and I think, you kind of mentioned that you have a knowledge of API and of the equipment that you guys are designing, but then of course you rely on people's expertise for other things. So what really drew you to wanting to revive this wonderful company? I mean, you really have done an incredible thing with it in the past 20 years. And what's it like to have a vision like that and acquire API and give it this whole incredible presence while relying on the help of so many people and so many experts and really coordinating all of that?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll say, Lidge, is it's not me. I didn't have that vision. I don't have I'm not a genius, but I have a crew of about 30 people who are passionate about audio, They're passionate about the company and the products that we manufacture. And we all collectively work toward the goal of providing the best product we can make to the audio industry at large to help those people who are creative bring out that creativity and allow them to, put it into a form that other people can enjoy it. Because you could get me in a headlock and I couldn't sing a song. I couldn't write a song.
Dude, I've seen pictures of you. I met you in person. I don't think I can get you in a headlock.
Yeah, I couldn't be forced into it. But there's a great quote from an interview we did a few years ago with Saul Walker, who said, I feel somewhat like the violin maker who can't play the violin, but he can make an instrument that allows other people to bring out their talent and their creativity. And I think API does a similar thing. We manufacture equipment that allows people who have creative talent, whether that's an artist or an engineer or the mixing guy, to focus that talent on the artist's creation as opposed to wrestling with the technology or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like that's what we do here at Recording Studio Rockstars, what I do. I don't have to make the greatest record in the world to be able to hopefully help, thousands of people make great records themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I can appreciate that. Well, we're glad you did it and are still doing it.
I'm happy about it too.
Yeah. Well, so let's rewind a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about who Saul Walker is. The 2520 discrete circuit op amp is an integral part of much of what is API. What is this circuit? Why is it important? Why do we care about all that?
Well, firstly, it's what we call discrete electronics. So it's individual transistors and resistors that form the gain cell that is the 2520. Over time, we've gone from tubes to transistors to integrated circuits where you pack a lot of transistors in a very tiny space. But tubes or discrete transistors allow some definition, let's call it, around the electronics that pass through the device. And so a combination of a 2520 gain cell and an input and or output transformer creates the character that API defines API's signature, if you will.
Yeah, the legendary API sound. I think that's how we like to refer to it.
Yes.
Very cool. And again, I'm so struck by the spirit of the inventor to go from automating a curtain to just simply saying, well, here's this great circuit design, and then having it grow into so many great things. Now, one of the ways that you guys, now, of course, API has developed incredible consoles, continues to develop incredible consoles, big, large consoles down to small ones for world-class studios all over. But you guys also really broke incredible ground for the growth of the home studio industry. The whole idea of the introduction of the lunchbox coming from API, that was so groundbreaking. Of course, my involvement in home studios is pretty deep. I have one myself. Many of our listeners do. I actually spent the last 5 years trying to save home studios here in Music City and was successfully able to do that.
Well, congratulations to you on that too. I should have said that right up front.
Oh, well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. But I mean, you've been saving home studios for a lot longer. So tell us about the 500 lunchbox. What is the 500 module series all about? I'm sure people hear that number all the time, and if they aren't really familiar with it, they might not really know why it's so important.
Well, I don't know that 500 itself has any particular significance other than it defines the module that initially went into API consoles. Consoles from the very early days of API were what we call modular. And so as opposed to an entire input strip that contains everything necessary to contain or gain or send the input, the console is modular. So there's an input strip, there's the EQs, compressor, etc., that go into a frame that form the various parts of eventually an entire console.
So you could remove a part and replace it if you wanted to as well.
Yes, or in the EQ or microphone, in the mic pre example, you can replace an EQ with another EQ of a different variety.
Right, exactly. And then another thing I remember being told early on, because the studio I interned at was Woodland Studios here in Nashville, and Steve Durr and Steve Hennig had Studio C there, and I thought they said it was like Elvis's old API or something like that. But I helped install that console, and they pointed out to me, they said, what's so cool about API consoles is you can easily patch in and out of just about anywhere.
Yeah, that's sort of always been the a design parameter for APIs that you can access by a patch pretty much any point in the signal chain.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Keep going. So you guys introduced the lunchbox. Where now we can all have that, right?
That's correct. At some point in time, somebody said, well, hey, if we just take a few, let's just say EQs, we take a few EQs out of a console and put them in a little portable rack, the engineer could go, I can take this thing with me to any studio I want to. And if they don't have an API console or they don't have API EQs, I can just walk in and say, hey, I'll put this on the shelf and you patch in my EQs or you patch in my mic pre's. So that little rack, eventually found itself a handle, and somebody dubbed it the lunchbox. And so the same modules that went into a console could now be put into a portable power supply that allowed engineers to carry let's call it their sound. You could have a couple of mic pre's and some EQs and a couple of compressors in a rack that you could go anywhere with it to help maintain, your sound, as it were. And we then discovered that there were some other people who had good ideas with respect to, let's say, mic pre-design. We said, well, gee, I could make a module that would fit in that powered rack, and I wouldn't have to design a power supply, and it could just be a little, another option for that 500 concept. And we, of course, in the very early days, said, wait a minute. These guys are horning in on our territory, and I was a little opposed to it at first, but then probably engineering correctly said, well, if somebody builds a piece of 500 gear and puts it into the lunchbox, and it's not, if the parameters are not well defined, how do we know that person is designing a piece that works correctly in a lunchbox, and therefore can we reliably support the warranty for the lunchbox or the other modules in the lunchbox?
Oh, interesting.
So that's when we decided, well, let's not be snooty about it. Let's go ahead and let the design specifications be published so that other people that want to make a module that fits into that lunchbox space can design it correctly so that it plays well with the other products in the rack. And that was the birth of what we call now the just out of my head.
Oh, it's all right. I'll drop a marker.
Yeah.
The beauty of the power of markers.
Yeah. And so that became what we now know as the VPR Alliance. And the VPR came from the fact that the 10-space rack that fits into a 19-inch rack that holds 10 modules is called the vertical powered rack. So the VPR Alliance was formed to allow people to get the specification for a 500 series piece, design that piece of whatever they wanted it to be, and it would then fit into either a lunchbox or that powered the rack mount piece, and play well with everyone else.
That's great. Well, you guys did a huge service for the entire music industry doing that. Well,
what are there now? 60 or 70 different kinds of 500 modules?
I think so, yeah. But some of the best still come directly from APIs. So,
well, we like to think so.
Yeah, absolutely. Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs, whether you are setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class studio for professional mixing and mastering. Their unique accelerated ribbon tweeter design is famous for creating smooth, detailed imaging that let your speakers disappear into your music, allowing you to focus on the mix. Learn how to set up your studio monitors and control room for great sound, plus lots of other cool studio tips at atom-audio.com/education. If you're ready to upgrade your studio to the famous sound of API's large format consoles, then you're ready for the Box, a small format console featuring the same analog circuitry and original 2520 op-amp design that has made API famous for 50 years. Record through 8 world-class mic pre-channels, mix through 24 smooth-as-glass faders, and upgrade your home studio to legendary status. API now offers a virtual console experience, allowing you to get a personalized online demo of the Box at apiaudio.com. I want to talk about some of the modules that that are available right now. So these are perfect things for home studio environments too. But let me begin by also saying, Larry, you got a great sounding voice. I mean, you sound like you should have been a radio DJ if you hadn't mentioned that yet. What are you using for your for right now for your voice?
Well, strangely enough, my voice is running through an Audix i5 microphone straight into an API 312 mic pre.
Nice.
And then some little piece of digital stuff that outputs a USB into our communication network here.
Let's talk about the 312. So the 312.
So let me interrupt if you don't mind me interrupting for a second, because you said I have what you may perceive as somewhat of a radio voice. I thought I was going to be a DJ at one point in time.
Well, you are now.
When I was in college, I joined the college radio station. And, I thought it was going to be cool that I could play records on the radio and play any kind of music I wanted to. But I very quickly learned that I was no DJ, and I did not have, while I may have a voice that's not abrasive, I don't have the what I call gift of gab, which is a real good communication style that sort of is spontaneous. It doesn't fit me. So I tried being a DJ for a little bit, and then I immediately moved over to the technical side of the radio station and worked in the tech department.
I think a lot of us feel that way sometimes. We think, we imagine ourselves as the front man singing in the band or front woman,
Yeah.
And then maybe we discover that our skill set is a little bit more, playing all the parts or, hooking up the gear or whatever.
Yes.
And I got drawn into doing this. You know what they say, I've got if I feel like I've got a face made for radio. Anyway, you do have a great sounding voice. So this is the 312 that we're hearing your voice through right now. Mm-hmm. And this, tell us a little bit about the 312 module. We would love to know more about these. I think this was a recent addition to the line, right? Or no?
It's the most recent addition to the 500 series line. The 312 was the first mic preamp made for API consoles, and the original mic pre's went into a rack cage that fit underneath the console, and they were just little cards that essentially had very little more than an op amp and a transformer on them. Mm-hmm. Which, sidebar here, is the reason that API has the sound and the clarity and the dynamic that it has is that most API products have a very short signal path from the input through the gain stage to the output. So you think about it, the less electronics you have in the way, the better your audio. You can maintain a higher quality of audio.
Absolutely. Now the 312 500 series module has a beautiful looking VU meter on it, which I love that throwback. And then you've got a gain knob and a pad, 20 dB pad, a polarity switch, so you can flip your polarity, not phase, rock stars. And then there's something called 3:1, 3-to-1.
3-to-1. Mm-hmm.
Tell us, what's that all about?
That switch changes the number of windings through the transformer so that it changes the gain through the transformer. So that it allows you, when you so desire, you can engage that 3-to-1 switch, and you can drive the mic preamp harder with a reduced output. So it gives you a more of the what we call the definition or the character of API by hitting that op amp and the front end of that transformer with a little bit higher level without overdriving the output. Because see, mic pre's and consoles for that matter in the early days were made to drive a tape machine. A tape machine had headroom of 20 dB or so. Nowadays, your headroom at the front end of your DAW is 0.
Right.
So when you hit a 0 input or you fill up all the bits, it doesn't get any louder. It just gets distorted. And so we suffered the criticism maybe for a while that a lot of the API products had a very high output that was too high to feed the next stage, whether that's your DAW or your digital input or whatever, because they had a very high output level initially designed to drive a tape machine. So that we eventually came to our senses and said, well, okay, we need to knock that level down a little bit, but as opposed to just turning down the input, where then your entire signal through a piece of API gear is reduced, you want to maintain a healthy signal, which gives it that character, and reduce the output. So nowadays, most of our mic pre devices have an output level control so that you can adjust the output level to match whatever downstream device you're feeding.
Right. I'm looking at the 512V right now, which has an output knob as well. But if I'm understanding you correctly, the 3-to-1 knob is sort of like, it just sort of gives you a one step to drop the output level of the mic pre?
Of the transformer, that's correct.
Of the transformer, okay.
It changes the taps on the transformer to reduce the output level.
Okay, great. Because that was a question that sort of came in from Craig Alvin was asking sort of about how to, if you're faced with a challenge of trying to get the input gain to a sweet spot, but then the output's too hot for the DAW, the DAW, then it sounds like the 3-to-1 switch, or just get the output knob, the 512, and you can control that.
That's correct.
Great. And then, we've got phantom power on them. I mean, I think they all have phantom power, which is great. What do we want to know about any other differences between, the 512C has a high Z input and a mic input, but it looks like did I say that right? Yeah, the 512V, excuse me.
Well, but the 512C, is a step back from the V. So that's the 5 was our standard 500 series mic pre for many years. And it does have, both mic and line input. And the reason then we went to the 512V was to give that output volume control, so you can control the output volume and adjust to whatever level your next device would like to see.
Yeah, and then you cleverly used a combo jack, so you didn't need quite as much real estate for the quarter-inch input and everything.
Yes.
Sorry, I missaid the name because I'm flipping between tabs as I look at these, but the so the 312, the 512C, and the 512V are three of the mic pre's Rockstars that you might consider for 500 input for, if you're going to load up your lunchbox, for example. They all sound great. I love the sound of these. I remember when we got them in the studio with a particular band I was working with, just putting them on drums and stuff just made the drums sound so good. So we really enjoyed that. What are some of the stories that you hear about best practices for using the API mic pre's? Are there particular things that people just come back time and time and again saying, I love it for this particular instrument or this use case?
There are, and of course they vary depending on people's use and their particular likes, I suppose. But people oftentimes say, drums and bass are probably two of the main things that API mic pre's are known for. Although you'll find an equal number of people who say, you can't beat the sound of a, rock electric guitar through a API mic pre. At the same time, we've had people who go, man, my acoustic has never sounded better through an API mic pre. So, it's all over the place, including vocals. So Is there one thing that an API mic pre is designed for? There really isn't. But there are a lot of people who have sometimes a strong opinion on their favorite application for API mic pre's.
Yeah. Well, I'd say it's designed for making your music sound awesome.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Sure. So let me jump forward to some of the other options too. So EQs is another thing that API is really famous for. Right now I'm looking at the 550A discrete 3-band EQ. I remember when that first showed up in the studio, I was working at Alex the Great. We just loved using that on stuff. And if it's okay to read it, there's a great quote on your website from Sean Everett. He mentions the 550A. He says, in particular, it's so simple that I feel like I can easily get a tone I was imagining out of them. It almost feels weaponized. Interesting. Sometimes in audio, things feel light and delicate. This feels like a lethal weapon. It's like a sword. That's a great quote.
And he's been on your show, by the way.
He has, a couple of times. Yeah, he's fantastic. He's fun.
Yeah. So the 550A 3-band is the original API EQ, which then somewhere in the 80s there somewhere, it expanded to a 550B, which is a 4-band EQ. And then there's also the 560, which is a 10-band graphic EQ.
Yeah, and the 560 is super fun. I don't know what it is about graphic EQs, but it feels like somebody just gave you a really cool toy to try out.
Oh, because they're fast. You don't have to think too much. Yeah,
you just grab a knob and it makes me feel more like I'm dialing in the graphic EQ in my car again, trying to get my car stereo to sound just right. Yeah. Very familiar.
Yeah.
Or like, what's the Boss guitar pedal that has the EQ on a graphic EQ, and you can kind of dial in your sound that way too.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But going back to the A for a minute, that is such a fantastically useful EQ in the studio. Some of the other features that are in there, you have a filter switch, you have LF and HF. Now, those I think are to switch the high and low EQs to be shelving rather than bell curve. Is that right?
Well, in the 550A, it defines the upper and lower roll-off point.
Right. Right. Okay.
So it defines your bandwidth.
Okay, so those are our filter switches. Okay, great. And then there's also just the switch that just says FLTR.
Should
we double check?
I'm gonna choke on the frequency, but it's either 60 or 80 hertz.
Okay, great.
Roll off.
Yeah, definitely a frequency we want to have some control over.
Now, what you will also notice if you look carefully at the 550A or B, and a lot of people don't. They just grab the knob and go, okay, I'm gonna just tweak it until it sounds good. But the center points of API EQs are not on what they call ISO centers. You will notice if you take a look at a graphic EQ, and that's probably the easiest way to look to see the frequencies. And a graphic EQ is spaced out in multiples. So you have 50 hertz, 100, 200, 400, 800, etc. An API EQ is not on those ISO centers, but are centered on musical note frequencies, which is one of the brilliant things about Saul Walker and those early days is they made an EQ that was musical.
That's why they sound so good.
Exactly, because that you can affect frequencies that are most commonly problematic or need a little boost or cut. As opposed to being on a fixed scientific frequency.
And there I went again, thinking that the reason it sounded so good was because of my guitar solo.
Well, it may have something to do with it, but the EQ helps a little too.
All right, very cool. So I'm going to point some of these out since I'm looking at it right now. So the low frequency goes 30, 40, 50, 100, 200, 300, 400. And the high is 2.5K. 5K. Well, by the way, we're allowed to geek out like this on this show. 7K, 10K, 12.5K, 15K, and 20K. That's interesting. So 20K, sometimes you look at that the first time and you think 20, I didn't think we could hear above 20K. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, because clearly you can crank that up and you're going to hear it.
Yes, what you eventually, and I don't think I can hear 20K myself either, but what you do hear are the harmonics of the tone or the frequency that you're working with, and boosting the harmonics of that frequency or the very high end of the spectrum does in fact have an effect.
Like a fold back to the harmonics that you hear and all that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. And then the mids, of course, 1.5K is right in that, that's I think if that 1K, 1.5K is the, what's the way to say it? It's the most sensitive frequency to the human ear.
Yeah, the most grating if it's harsh.
Right. Well, I'll try to speak with a smooth tone today. Okay, great. And then you guys went to the 4-band EQ. Why would we consider getting the 3-band EQ versus the 4-band EQ? What do the rock stars need to know about that?
Well, it's just a different approach. I mean, obviously, 4 bands gives you more control. It's a debate. I'm not going to say that I would or you should prefer one over the other, because there's a fierce loyalty group out there who says, man, that 550A is the nuts for me. It does everything. There are other people who go, the 550B with 4 bands does everything I needed to do. And so there's sort of two camps of purists who have their loyalties to either the 3-band or the 4-band. And there are other people who go, well, sometimes the 3-band works great. Other times I just can't get it right where I need it. And you go to the 4-band and you find the frequency you need.
Yeah, I think that's great. And then rock stars, I mean, I think one way to think about the API cues, at least until we get to the next one, is it's a little less about this mentality of surgical EQ. It's more about musical EQ, right? It's more about being able to enhance or just sort of like, pull back a little bit on certain frequencies. But it's not, sometimes when we look at EQs on computer screens, we think about these crazy graphs that are going all over the place. And it's not really how people used to EQ, or still, it's not how people are EQing, I don't think.
Right. Well, you can certainly approach it from that surgical perspective and try to find the exact frequency you're looking for and, notch it out if you want. But our approach is a little wider, saying that you want to adjust the frequency, the center frequency of the sound that's either let's call it a problem, that you want to take some out, but you also then take out gently other frequencies around it so that you don't have this real hard dip in your EQ.
I kind of feel like if I was if putting makeup on was important to me, these would be important strategies for that too.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't. There's another great quote on this page right here. This is for the 550B 4-band EQ. It's a quote from Josh Wilbur, who'd said, "I love the 550B EQs, especially for my overhead mics. Sometimes I'm not even adding a ton of EQ. Sometimes I'm just running through them. It seems to make things just sound smoother to me." What's that all about when people talk about, just going through the gear and how it does a character? Because, I mean, is it just voodoo, or is there really a thing going on?
No, there's a thing going on because, again, the op amp and transformer have a character. We're not ones to say that API products are completely transparent gain devices. They have a character. They do stuff, which is maybe where the voodoo comes in. But just running through a piece of API gear, you're going through the 2520 gain stage and an output transformer that subtly affects the output sound.
Right. That makes sense. And then, I mean, certainly transformers, I've heard that transformers have a sound to them, but yeah, even the discrete circuitry has a sound to it that can enhance. And I guess part of that enhancement, if it even matters, sometimes we talk about harmonics and it's like, hey, come on, guys, has anybody actually seen a harmonic? Have you ever seen a harmonic running down the road? No, but we know that that's part of what can make things sound exciting to us. So I wonder if there's harmonic qualities to going through the gear too that just sort of enhances the sound and makes it sound great.
Yeah, there sure are.
Let's talk a little bit more about the 560, because this is a really fun EQ, the discrete 10-band graphic EQ. Now, we did a mixing clinic at Recording Studio Rockstars with Craig Alvin, and he used a digital version of that, but it was sort of a thing we used on kick drum that just sounded so awesome on that. And of course, using a real the real piece of gear, the real analog gear is going to sound really, really great, especially when you can actually record through it if you want to as well. Some of the frequencies, I'll just list them out: 31, 63, 125, 250, 500, 1K, 2K, 4K, 8K, and 16K. So interesting that those are different center points too from some of the other EQs. Was there a logic to that is worth talking about, or is that just what works well for a 10-band?
Well, that was, in that particular case, it's a little more traditional graphic EQ style because most of them are multiples of the frequency below it.
Right.
And it gives, there are people who like the 560 because it's easy to grab. You just grab a slider and boost or cut. Or if you don't particularly care about the frequencies, you just do stuff until it sounds good. Whereas you don't have to concentrate on what frequency you're working with or whether you're boosting or cutting. You just grab that slider. And I've seen some, they call it writing your name with the graphics. But some pretty drastic EQ positions on those faders that still sound really good.
The Spectra 1964 Custom Shop now offers the STX100D, the big brother to the now famous STX100, a fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers. The STX100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 comp limiter, then check out the new STX600 modules, combining the STX100 mic pre and C610 in a single 500 module. That's how you're hearing my voice. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and comp limiters. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. Whether you're in the studio or working remotely, the Envoy Pro FX from OWC lets you record from anywhere with confidence. It pushes USB technology bandwidth to the max of 2,800 megabytes per second over Thunderbolt, giving you high-speed audio data and recording and playback. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for the road, the OWC Envoy Pro FX is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Creativity without limits, only from OWC. Imagine never having to worry about your external drive interface again or compatibility from studio to studio. Find the new Envoy Pro FX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. iZotope is a secret weapon for your studio that can help you get consistently pro-sounding mixes. And now you can get access to all their plugins through the new subscription options. Only $24.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, Tonal Balance Control, Visual Mixer, and much more, including free plugin updates. Or for only $19.99 per month, you can join Producers Club to get a suite of industry-leading production, mixing, and mastering plugins, custom presets, royalty-free samples, production courses, and more. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Larry Droppa, joining us from API Audio. We're going to dig more into some of the compressors and the consoles, and then we're going to get to questions from you, the Rockstars, in the second half of the show. Larry, are you ready to jam, my friend?
Let's go.
All right, cool. Okay, so here's a compressor that, again, is a 500 module, the 525. Tell us about that. I've got a quote from somebody else who's also been on the show, Daniel Tashin, but I'll circle back with that quote after you get a chance to talk about it.
Well, the 525 was the first API compressor, fairly simple in operation. It has a limited parameters, a couple of switches that you can control a few different ratios, but not complex to operate, all told. And it's been a favorite with bass players and guitarists for many years. But people who like to have a lot of control over all of the thresholds and the gain and release and all that, we're a little disappointed in that it made the decisions for you.
Right.
So that then went, for us, led to the development of the 527.
I feel like that's a software challenge that people sometimes complain about.
Yeah,
when things get too simplified.
Yeah, but sometimes simple is better, even though people don't want to. They don't want to hand over the decision-making process to a manufacturer.
Well, let me talk about some of the things I see in front of me. So we've got input and output, threshold and makeup, and then there's a 2-to-1 and a 20-to-1. It seems like there's a release mode, and then there's something called D-S.
Yeah, which you don't see very much on a piece of gear anymore. But that's a de-esser.
Okay.
Which, if you use on a vocal, you put in the DS, it takes the harsh sibilant sounds out of your audio.
Okay, cool. So this was meant to be a very strict de-esser, or was it meant to be sort of a compressor that de-essed at the same time as it was compressing?
That's really a secondary function.
Okay, groovy. Okay, well then let's see. Here's the quote from Daniel Tashin. So Daniel, who's been on the show as well, he talked about, he said, I was working with an artist tracking vocals when all of a sudden the vocals started sounding fantastic. I looked over and saw the engineer turning a knob and I said, what is that? It was an API 525. It was bringing this vocal right out front and center in the song. I said, I have to have one of those. So now I got to have one too. Thanks, Daniel. Very cool.
The more the merrier.
Yeah, obviously vocals is a good choice for that.
Mm-hmm.
Now here's another compressor that's a 500 module, and we're going to talk about this more in a minute, but we'll find this one in the box console as well. It's the 527 compressor limiter. Tell us a little bit about that if you want.
Okay, well that compressor was developed in response to people who didn't think that 525 gave them enough control. So the 527 gives you control parameters for pretty much every option that you need in a compressor. So you can adjust the threshold, the attack and release times, as well as the ratio, and in a whole bunch of variables.
Right. So the 525 was more like you had some buttons, some presets that you could use, and the 527 just gives you the knob where you can turn it through everything.
That's correct.
And it's funny how sometimes the presets, you might think you're limited, but really the presets just, they're preset for a reason. Like they sound great.
Well, that's what we think.
And let's see, here's a quote about the 527. Hopefully this helps Rockstar just give some context about, how you might choose one of these for your studio. This comes from Wes Mabe, if I'm pronouncing that. Maybe. Thank you. Thank you so much. Apologies, Wes. It's little bits of compression on the 527 compressors that I like. I tend to stay away from severe slamming unless that's required, but generally just a tickle, like a dB or something. It just brings out all the attack and kick drums and fattens up snares. I think that's a great quote too, because it's just that reminder that sometimes recording and getting things to sound fantastic is about making smart choices and using a little bit. It's sort of like cooking, just a little bit of salt on things. If you over salt it, it's not going to be so good.
That's a good one.
Yeah. All right, cool. So let me move over to, here's a piece of gear. This is the 3124V discrete 4-channel mic line pre. Now, the reason I pull this one up is this was one that when my brother years ago told me he needed some, he was ready to build his home studio and he needed the right stuff, I was like, get that, man. That's going to be amazing. And he's been using it for 20 plus years. And, when he sends me stuff that he records in his home studio and I mix it, it ends up sounding great. my mix was okay in that case. But, point being, even in that situation where my brother might have been self-confessed as like, I'm no engineer, I'm just sort of like winging it with the gear, what he sends just sounds killer. And so it's one of the reasons why I think it's so valuable to use these API mic pre's when you're recording, and the power of using a really high quality preamp instead of just simply saying, well, my interface has got a mic. All I got to do is plug the mic straight into it and turn up the volume. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, just generally speaking. Why is it that a dedicated mic preamp can sound so great, but or sounds so much better than just plugging into an interface and turning up the volume going into your DAW, your computer interface, and expecting it to sound just as good?
Well, in most cases, those manufacturers that are making let's call it a multi-function device, the mic pre is a consideration because you have to get the gain of that mic pre up to a line level, up to a workable level. A dedicated mic pre, its only design criteria is to make the audio sound great. And so you can concentrate on designing a mic pre to be the best gain product that you can make it. And so we will argue that a dedicated mic pre is better in those situations because we've done the best job we can do on the mic pre alone.
Yeah. And I remember one of the first times I ever heard a dedicated mic pre like this. The thing that really struck me was I think we just took a SM57 and plugged it into that. And I was like, wait a minute, how does an SM57 sound so incredibly good to me right now? And it was just going through such a high quality mic preamp. It really breathes life into the microphone in a way that until you hear it, you didn't even know that it was there.
Yeah. So a little mention on the 3124, which you brought up, your brother has. The 3124 is in essence 4 312 mic pre's in a rack, in a 19-inch rack. So the mic pre design itself is the same as the 312.
Although with this rack we get the output control as well.
That's correct. Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
But as far as economy of scale goes, a 3124 is the most cost-effective way to get 4 mic preamps in a rack.
Right, exactly, and I'm pretty sure that's why I recommended it to my brother too.
Yeah.
Now the beauty is if you get a lunchbox, Rockstars, you can maybe, I don't know, Larry, do you want to talk about what are some of the size options for a lunchbox in case somebody's thinking like, do I get a 4-channel or are there bigger ones?
Well, if you get a 4-channel, you're going to have to go to the antique shop.
Okay.
Because there was a 4-channel version made years ago, but not in the last several years. So as far as the lunchboxes go, there's a 6-space lunchbox, there's an 8-space lunchbox, and then in a rack mount version, there's a 10-space vertical powered rack.
Okay, great. Oh, yeah, and that goes back to you mentioning the VPR Alliance. Is that vertical power rack that goes back to that, right?
That's correct, yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then I guess so if you wanted to have 6 to 10 modules, the lunchbox would be the way to go. And if you wanted less than that, then this discrete 4-channel would be a way to, like you said, have an efficient, cost-effective, high-quality mic preamp.
That's the way to do it. Yeah. Now, some people will find that they buy a lunchbox and they put a few modules in it, and over time, expand and eventually fill up the lunchbox, and then they say, "Well, gee, maybe it's time to buy another lunchbox." And so we have people out there who have multiple lunchboxes loaded with multiple series of modules, which is pretty cool.
Well, that's unfortunately where the analogy falls flat, because if it was really a lunchbox, you'd just simply eat your lunch and then you'd fill it back up again. Okay, let's talk about some of these incredible consoles. Where do we begin, Larry?
How much time do we have?
Well, let me talk. Let me sort of stay on the theme here a minute first, with the idea of what's available to us in our studios, our home studios. So many of us are working from home now, especially especially right now. And the box is this incredible option that gives us access to, all this incredible legendary API sound, but it also gives us flexibility and integrates with our studio DAW, our Pro Tools, or whatever we're recording with. But we also get the master section. Would you like to give us sort of an introductory breakdown to what the box is? I'm looking at the picture here too, if we need to help digging into some of the details.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's first just go through the line, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The box is the basic. I hate to call it basic, but it's the entry point as far as API consoles go. The 1608 is the next one up, the 2448, and then the Access console, and then the Vision console.
Okay.
So we'll back down to the box console. The box console these days is 8 input channels with fully featured input strip, mic pre, and a 500 series space at the top. So you can put any one of a number of optional modules in the 500 slot. And then you have the center section. And then to the right of the center section are 16 line returns. So that as you build your mix with the 8 inputs to your DAW, once you finish your project, you can then come back into the line returns, and those 16 line returns can come from your DAW. The 8 input channels can also be line returns.
Right.
And there's a third 2-channel input in the master section. So you have altogether 26 returns to the console. Okay,
so technically you could use the 8 mic pre's in the recording side of this to record a record with, and then, record a song. And then when you're ready to mix, you sort of break it out through all 26 to come back and mix it that way if you want to. Now, we've had guests on the show. I've talked with Eric Massey, Anthony Gravino's been on the show too. And we talked a lot about the box. One of the things that I really love about any of your consoles is what we used to take for granted, and we forgot. It's almost like, we forgot the history of how we would record when we switched to computer recording. We used to just plug things in and, you turn it up, and if you wanted to send something else somewhere else and blend it back in again, you didn't even think about it. You just did it. And then that got lost with computer recording because all of a sudden you've got latencies and things and you have to sort of wait till later. And so that to me is what's really remarkable about working with a console, and even above and beyond just getting signal into the computer. And then, the question of like, should we break it out when we mix it? It's just that ability, that flexibility at the time of creation. That's really what working with a console brings, that gets lost pretty easily. I don't know if you want to comment on that, or if you have thoughts about that yourself too.
Well, it's true, and at the same time, we are convinced that breaking the individual channels out and recording them and as you're tracking in an analog fashion, you're able to maintain a good wide dynamic approach to your audio. We say that digital is a great storage medium, but then when you come back from your DAW and mix down on an analog console, you still have in the center section a very wide, open, dynamic capability in your mix when you get down to stereo. So you're able to maintain a good dynamic signal, whereas computer has a power supply that's either 5 volts or 12 volts. Whereas a console gives you a much higher headroom, much wider dynamic range.
So even in the mix stage, you're saying we're gonna notice that dynamic range increase.
Yes, we think we are. Yeah.
And then I've also heard people talk about when you mix back through a console, you get an extension of the fundamental or of the low end. Is that something that you experience or is worth talking about?
Well, only because you're going through the op amp and transformer again. Because that's what gives you the character to your mix or to your tracks. So that when you come back out of your DAW through a console, through the center section, you're going through a series of op amps and transformers that then give you or retain that character that's API.
Right. And then another thing that I'm remembering too is, so when I'm looking at the box, for example, we can have 8 mic preamps on the left-hand side, and we can return up to 26 at mixing, but it doesn't mean that we can't access the other 16 initially, right? If we had 2 more lunch boxes, we could use those as mic preamps and come into the other 16 and essentially have a 24 channel console if we wanted to not even go to the computer. If we wanted to just mix live down to 2-track that way, that would be an option?
Absolutely. And especially with an 8-channel lunchbox, the lunchbox has a DB25 connector. So you can go DB25 out of the lunchbox, DB25 into the box console without a bunch of patch cables. One single cable will give you 8 channels at a time. So you absolutely can have a whole bunch of mic pre's on the line side of the console and do a multi-channel recording down to stereo, on the fly.
That's pretty cool because you might find yourself with all this gear in the studio, and sometimes you want to record into the computer, sometimes you want to go do a remote thing. And there's this sort of built-in element of portability to the way you guys approach it with the modularity that allows us to do that, which is pretty cool. Now, some of the other things in the center section, I believe we have a pair of 527 EQs.
That's right.
In the box. I mean, I just said EQs. My apologies. Compressors.
That's right.
What are some other features of the whole center section that are worth mentioning? Some use case scenarios. Would we mix right through the 527s linked in stereo? I mean, are those pretty cool for mixing through?
They're great for that. And you can choose to insert the 527s on the stereo path if you want to or not. By the way, the center section of a box console is a fully featured center section, very much like a 1608 or a 2448 or an access console. So the technology is the same. We haven't scrimped on parts in the center section of a box console. So it's a big boy, just in a smaller frame. With respect to the compressor section, when you're tracking, you can take the one half of the 527 and assign it to an input channel. So it can assign to either channel 1 or channel 3 of the inputs, or the other side of the 527 can attach to channel 2 or channel 4. So you can apply compression when you're tracking if you want to. And then when you have your project done and you're mixing, you just unselect those switches and it inserts that stereo compressor onto the stereo bus.
Oh, I love that. You don't even need a patch bay.
Very flexible. That's right. That's right.
My patch bay can be a little bit of a nightmare sometimes. It would be hard to describe in one sentence what gives records a legendary sound, but it would be easy to describe in 3 letters: API. For more than 50 years, API Audio has created large format consoles for world-class studios. Famous for co-founder Saul Walker's circuit designs and the original 2520 op-amp, the sound of API consoles is the sound of great music. API now brings that legendary sound to your home studio with the Box, a small format console featuring the famous API circuitry that is the perfect analog addition to your digital studio. The Box gives you 8 recording channels on the left with built-in mic pre's, high-pass filters, direct inputs, and customizable 500 module slots, and 16 summing channels on the right. Or you can mix using all 24 channels, including aux sends, inserts, and silky smooth faders. API now offers a virtual console experience with a personalized online demo of the Box, 16082 or 2448 consoles. Sign up for your demo now at apiaudio.com. Making sure your vocal sounds amazing in your mix starts with capturing your voice perfectly. This means controlling sibilants and plosives at the mic. Back when I started out, we used to make pop filters out of pantyhose and a wire hanger, but not only did it not look good or smell great, but it also didn't sound all that great either. There's a reason that the Beastie Boys said they never rocked the mic with the pantyhose. Fortunately, pop filters have come a long way in the studio, and Jay-Z Mics brings you the ultimate pop filter, built from solid metal parts that won't break and a flexible gooseneck for easy placement. The Jay-Z pop filter uses a unique waveguide design that prevents plosives from getting through to the mic while letting important high frequencies through for clarity. Get your vocals just right and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. I don't want to shortchange some of these other incredible consoles, so let's jump over. Talk for a moment about the 1608.
Well, 1608 is a mid-sized console, 16 channels in its basic form. Again, fully featured. You have 16 500 series slots across the top, and in the center section you have 8 blank spaces for 500 series. Those, if you put a module in the blank spaces above the center section, it normals to the aux returns, but you can patch those into any place in the console.
Right, like we were talking about earlier, the ability to patch everywhere, access anything.
A 1608 is expandable in buckets of 16, so you can have a 16-channel frame, a 16-channel expander next to it for 32, or a third 16-channel expander to make a 40-channel 1608.
Yeah, okay, so here's another quote. This is on the 1608 page from Devin Kirkpatrick. It says, his first word is expandable. 100% analog, fantastic sounding preamps, and top-of-the-line summing and mixing options were all things that were missing before we got our 1608. The console is definitely designed for a high-end hybrid workflow and has an excellent signal flow options. The sound, in a word, is fantastic. Nice. I mean, it's so much fun when you get to mix on a console. Honestly, I'm not sure how many people would be listening to this who don't instinctively know that it would be awesome to mix on a console.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say anything bad about mixing in computers. I mean, it's amazing what computers do, and they've opened up a world of being able to make records for all of us. But it's so much fun to integrate with incredible sounding analog gear, or to, when you get a chance to either get a console for your studio or take your mix and go to another studio that has one and give it a try. So yeah, I love it.
As an example, the mid-frame consoles, a 1608 or a 2448, similar to the box. I mean, they're not compromised in any way. And even some of the big boys use a 1608 for a project. And if you'll let me spill a little bit of my ego here,
sure.
I just picked up my phone in the office one day, and the guy at the other end said, "I'm the studio manager for the biggest band in the world." And of course, I say, "You work for the Rolling Stones?"
Nice.
He said, "No, I'm calling you from Dublin, Ireland."
Oh, wow.
I said, "Okay, I know who you are." He said, "The band would like to use an API console to record their next album. Would you loan us a console?" I said, "No, we really don't loan consoles, but I'd sell you a console."
Nice.
He said, "Well, no, the band really doesn't buy consoles." And as I mentioned earlier, I don't oftentimes think very quickly on my feet, but in this particular case, I said, "Well, I'll tell you what I would do. I would build you a console, and I would lease it to you for as long as you want to make an album," knowing full well that some bands take years to produce an album.
I think in physics they call this when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, right?
That's right, exactly right. Yeah. So we built a 48-channel 1608, put it in a road case, and shipped it to Dublin, Ireland. And U2 made the album Songs of Innocence on that console.
Wow, that's awesome, man. It's interesting to hear you talk about 48-channel 1608, because when we hear the numbers, we think, 16 must refer to how many faders there are, But you just have the ability to, you start, you got to have a model number. It's got to come from somewhere, right?
Correct.
In fact, let me see. There was a question. See if I can remember who asked this. Maybe it was Chris James. Yes, he asked a couple of questions. So I'll put this one in. He said, did API have a model number logic for introducing new gear to help us know what era a particular piece came from? And it's just that topic of like, you come up with a number. These are just numbers, rock stars, but they do have a history to them, right?
They do, although they don't necessarily mean, consecutive development of product. That we have a numbering scheme that oftentimes results from the roll of a dice, especially with the 500 series products. But there's some logic to the 1608 is 16 channels, 8 buses, and 8 auxes. Turns out a 2448 is 24 channels and 8 buses.
Mm-hmm.
An access console doesn't have any numbers.
Nice.
It's whatever you want it to be.
It's whatever you want it to be. Yeah, I think the access was in Studio B at Blackbird. Do you know?
No, Studio B has it's a precursor to the Access. That's a legacy console. Yes.
Yeah, I did a session on that and mixed on it, and I just had such a blast.
Mm-hmm. I love that. The legacy eventually became the Access console.
Okay, great.
With an upgrade.
Well, it sure did sound good. I mean, I still could have learned a few things about how to mix well, but everything I did, maybe that's why I had trouble with my mix. Everything I did just sounded so great.
So hopefully you got to Studio D while you were there.
Yes, tell us about Studio D. Now, that's the one with the particularly large console?
It is. That is the largest API ever manufactured.
Wow.
It's a 96-channel console with 192 faders.
That's amazing. 192 faders. What do you do with 192 faders?
I don't know, because when we originally were speccing that console, it was originally specced as an 80-channel console. And I had a discussion with John McBride about replacing the console that he had in Studio D, and he said, "Give me a quote on a 48, a 64, and an 80-channel console." So I worked it up with him, and we talked it over, and he decided on an 80-channel console because it fit the space, and he needed the room. But when we went there to do the actual spec for the console, we knew where the console was going, where the supplies, where was the machine room, where was the patch bay going to go. John, who's a fabulous guy and just has a real passion for audio, said, "What's the largest console you've ever built?" We said, "Well, we have built one other 80-channel console." He says, "Can it go any bigger?" And we said, "Well, yeah. 96 would be the best. Would be the next increment." So he turns to his studio manager and goes, "Do we need a 96-channel console?" He said, "John, nobody needs a 96-channel console, but you'd have the bragging rights." John turned around to me and held out his hand and said, "It's a 96-channel console."
That's great. I'm thinking of, was it not the Life of Brian, the other one where it's like, "Thou shalt not build a 95-channel console, nor shalt thou." The holy hand grenade. Nor shalt thou build a 97-channel console.
Yeah. But it turns out, and I've heard the story. I wasn't there, so I don't know the facts. But one of the first sessions done on that console when it was put in was the last Brooks and Dunn record, which used all 192 faders.
Wow, and they were all kick drums, huh?
Apparently so. Yeah.
Sorry, I was terrible misquote on my hand. That was, of course, was the Holy Grail, right?
That's right.
Okay, cool. So now I watched you give a tour of the front office there on a video, and you were pointing out some of these beautiful photos of consoles in pretty remarkable locations that you had on the wall. Let's talk a little bit about this. What's like to you? What are some of the coolest locations that an API console exists? There's I think the Mormon Tabernacle has one in the basement.
Correct. It's underneath the Mormon Tabernacle.
Yeah. Is that? I mean, I picture huge choral ensembles, but how many people can you fit in a basement?
Well, it's just the studio in the basement.
Okay.
So if the Mormon Tabernacle Choir is singing, upstairs. They can cover that.
Great.
The nice thing about that facility is everything on that campus, which covers probably half of downtown Salt Lake, is interconnected. So they can go from any number of performance spaces to record a project. And supposedly every Sunday service is broadcast in multiple languages around the world.
Wow.
Goes through that console.
That's pretty wild. So there must have been some challenge. Now, were you involved in the connecting as well, or that's separate?
No, we just installed the console.
Okay. I imagine there were some unique challenges to doing all that stuff.
Well, they got miles and miles of probably copper cable as well as digital cable at this point.
Yeah.
Fiber.
And now I believe Dave Cobb has an API console here as well.
He does. Right? Yes, he does. He had a console in that space, and before Dave was in there, it was the space was occupied by
Ben Folds. Was that
Ben
right?
Folds, correct? And Ben put an old API console in there that I had not seen prior to Ben installing that console. But that console was built in 1976 because the EQs have red, white, and blue on the knobs on the 3-band on the 550As, and Ben kept them that way. And then when he moved on, Dave acquired that console, and when he decided to move along to an Access console, one of the selling points to him was the fact that he could take those 1976 EQs out of his old console and put them in a brand new Access.
Nice.
And so that Access console has red, white, and blue EQs in it that were made in 1976.
So one of the things that strikes me when you tell a story like that is just that reminder to us rock stars that part of getting gear like this and having it in your studio is that it's kind of like having a favorite guitar and a favorite amp. It becomes part of a sound that you'd want to always be able to get that sound, It sounds so great that you'd want to be able to have that kind of vocal sound or have that kind of bass tone when you go do an overdub. So that's cool to hear that story. Also, I think so, to put it in context, 1976, of course, was the bicentennial, right?
Mm-hmm, that's right. That's why they were red, white, and blue.
Yeah, that's great. And I remember as a little kid, I think President Ford landed in a helicopter on my school's soccer field because I grew up in Concord, Massachusetts.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the shot heard around the world in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, wow.
So, okay, cool. Now, some of the other ones that you talked about in that video were, there was a console that was used for the Foo Fighters.
That's correct. Yep. Dave Grohl has a 1608 in his house. And that Wasting Light album was tracked on a 1608 in Dave's house. And they put together a little archival video as they were making the album. And then when they were done with all the recording, they went to a studio to mix the album. They spent about a few days to a week, I'm not sure exactly, in the studio and go, man, it just doesn't sound very good here. So they went back to the house and they mixed that album on the 1608 at Dave's house.
Nice.
And it won multiple Grammys.
That's cool. Now, and another thing you mentioned was a series of cream-colored APIs, right?
Yes. Those were done years ago, probably in the mid '70s there somewhere. And I'm not sure why they were cream-colored, or we call them white consoles, but it's sort of a creamy color. And there's still a few of those around. One of those, in fact, is still in Nashville. At House of David.
Oh, cool. Yeah. House of David's always, what a cool place. Speaking of Elvis, that was the studio that was designed.
That's correct. That's right.
For Elvis to come record when he would come to Nashville. And, either one of us could probably tell the story, but apparently Elvis was meant to pull into the garage underneath and then come up through the floor into the console so nobody would see that he had arrived.
Yeah, there's a trap door in the floor. You pull up.
But I think that they built a console, and then sadly Elvis passed before he got a chance to go to use it or something like that.
It's true.
Mastering is a guilty pleasure. It's been phenomenal to hear a client tell me that the master wasn't just perfect, but it was right. It connected. I love assisting with the mixing process by giving free feedback just because, If the mix feels some positive impact from my input, frankly, it'll be easier to master. At least 50% of the mastering is preparing the mix. If the mix is really good, most of the mastering is already done. It's much more of a conversation now from end to end. It shouldn't be a black art that's hidden behind closed doors. Shouldn't be a one-shot deal either. Even after the master is delivered, we can still work on it. We can even go back and make mix changes later and update the master for a fraction of the cost. That's the iterative master. I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. Let's talk about how I can help elevate your mix into the best master possible. Contact me and get free feedback on your mix or a free master demo at soundporter.com.
Atom Audio designs monitors with a mission to bring accuracy, transparency, and high definition to your studio, guiding you each step of the way on your journey from starting out in a home studio to installing your ultimate mixing setup in your pro studio. Check out their complete line of speakers and headphones, from the T-Series to the AX Series to their top-of-the-line S-Series, which all use the unique ART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, famous for creating smooth, detailed imaging that lets your speakers disappear into your music. Won't it feel awesome to make brilliantly accurate, creative decisions in your mixes because you can finally hear your music clearly? Your ears are the greatest instrument you have, and if you can hear the music, then you can mix the music. Learn how to set up your studio monitors and control room for great sound, plus lots of other cool studio tips at atom-audio.com/education. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to start mastering your own records? Rockstars of Mastering walks you through exactly how I mastered my own record using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. Want to learn how to create a mix that doesn't suck but rocks instead? At Mixmaster Bundle, I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins so that you can have punchy, powerful drums, guitars that rock, bass you can feel, and a mix that is in your face. Plus, it's totally free as my way of saying thanks for listening. Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now and look for the clickable link in the show notes below. Okay, so let me see. So I'm going to segue here because I don't want to run out of time before we ask some of these questions. I'll begin with this one because it's relevant to the consoles. This comes in from Mark Rubel. He said he wanted to ask, that is it true you had bought Les Paul's console? He's thought, and what were plans for that?
Well, Mark, it's true.
The big reveal. Right. Do I get in trouble now?
No. I'm actually very proud of it because I received a auction catalog that was in fact a sale of a lot of the estate of Les Paul, and I was just leafing through the things. Of course, it was covered with guitars and old one-offs and experimental things from Les Paul, and lo and behold, there was his console.
Wow!
I had received a phone call from Les Paul at one point, who had asked some questions about getting some spare parts for his console. His console lived in his house in New Jersey. And when I saw that console going up for auction, I go, man, it'd be just great to bring that back home, where it came from. But it turns out my wife had booked us attending a horse show that day, and so here we are at a horse show in an arena, and I've got my eye on my phone, keeping track of the auction. So when I came close to the Les Paul console, I had to go out to a quiet place and place my bid. And then next thing you know, we brought it home. Wow. So I gave, I think, 2 summer interns probably the best job they have had or will ever have, which is tearing down that console to the frame, and we rebuilt that console in its entirety.
Nice. Little horse trading at the horse show.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, incredible. And so you're I'm sorry, you said you are rebuilding it, or you have rebuilt it?
Yeah, we rebuilt it a couple of years ago. It's in fabulous shape, and we haven't done anything with it other than show it at the 50th anniversary year last year at the AES show. I'm thinking at some point it would be great to do something special with an up and coming band or some kind of a some opportunity for somebody to record on that console, because it would just be a fabulous experience.
Well, I volunteer for us to do our next podcast interview, just our two vocal mics through the console.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Interesting side note on that is that we took channel 1, the board tape is still on that console, and channel 1 says less guitar.
Great.
We took the 312 mic pre out of that console and used it to replicate the current 312 production in the 500.
Wow. And I wanted to say that the expression "less is more" takes on a whole new meaning when you see that console tape there, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
All right, so now here's another question. This comes in from one of the rock stars, Donnie Hill. He said, "I always like the music that has been recorded on API consoles. Something about the clarity it has, or punch that SSL and Neve doesn't have. Kind of hard to explain. 80s rock." I guess it's not really a question. It's just talking about the clarity and the punch. What does that mean? What is clarity and punch, and why does API have it?
Well, I generally hesitant to disparage other manufacturers.
Sure.
Several good ones out there, but the clarity and punch that defines what most people recognize as the character of API. Again, it extends back to that core design, which is the op amp and transformer. Short signal path maintains the clarity and the dynamics of the mic that's coming into that channel, and so it does seem that when you listen to a project done through an API console, that somehow the character, the dynamics, the punch, they call it, of the project is it's able to maintain itself through the duration of the project, and we're pretty proud of that fact.
Well, that's great. Okay, so here's another one. This one comes from Rob Chandler. Rob says, "How do you take something so iconic yet esoteric and subjective as a sound or flavor, if you will, and keep that vision consistent through each new product?"
That is one of the biggest challenges that we face in engineering. The API engineering department, of which Todd and Jeff and Lee are my heroes, they spend a high percentage of their time on products that we are either designing or modifying, or upgrading, in making sure that the designs we make today are true to the designs of previous API products and have a sound that is consistent with the previous products. Because we recognize there are people who bought a 512, let's say, years and years ago, and now they've met with some either bit of success or socked money away or whatever. They go, well, now I can buy another mic pre. Well, they want to buy another mic pre and have it sound like the one that they have loved for the last 20 years.
Right.
And that's a challenge for us, but we have a commitment to be consistent with respect to the products in the line. So they do, in fact, have a consistency of sound and character. Yeah, that's a tough job.
Yeah, really, and a good answer. And you may, of course, have to strike a balance between having in-house quality controls, where you guys know whether it's holding up, but also relying on, trusted users and producers and engineers that you really admire.
It's pretty rare that we introduce a product without having some of our trusted ears, if you will, out in the field we've sworn to secrecy, give a listen to some of our upcoming products.
Nice. Okay, so here's another one. This one comes from Kyle Smith. He said, "I of course would love to know about the history, but really curious where they want to take it. With things shifting to emulations and plugins, as well as the 500 series, I would be curious what they might try to do, especially for the home studio, which also makes me wonder, what's the business model that it's looked like for the past 20 years as more moving forward as more people can record from their home than ever before." And I feel like we've answered a bunch of those on the podcast already, but if there's more you want to say about that, please do.
Yeah, I think I would only say that the paradigm shift in the ability for the average person, I'm calling, without being negative, a person can make a very high quality releasable product in their basement or their home studio these days, where that technology not very long ago was completely inaccessible. And I think that the 1608 console really started that, and then the development of the box console further enhanced that. And at the time, we looked like geniuses because we came out with those products right when there was an explosion in the home studio market. But it was dumb luck, truly, because we decided that more people had access to recording technology, and to bring the size of those products down that would fit into a home studio made physical sense, and in the long term made economic sense for those people who just were putting a home studio together. And so it really did help propel the technology that's available to a home artist or a home creative person. Where does that go from here? I don't know. We're just happy that people still like us.
Nice.
And just let me talk for a second about plugins and things. There were when plugins were sort of coming into vogue, there were a number of people who initially made products that looked very much like API products. I don't know what they sounded like, but it just annoyed me that they looked like API products. And so as opposed to fighting those people, we decided, well, let's go ahead and partner with a couple manufacturers who do modeling and plugins and license those products officially, so that we can say we do endorse some of the plugin products that give people a good representation of what API is like, and that's been very good for us as well.
Yeah, I think that was that answers one of Mark Rubel's questions about how do you protect the standards of excellence when licensing the intellectual property for plugins and things. And then also Roger Allen Nichols asked a question, which is kind of the reverse of that. How much has the venture into software helped with the analog side of things? How has it impacted the analog API gear?
Well, quite honestly, we were apprehensive about licensing plugins because we thought for sure it had the potential to really kill the hardware.
Right. It's this idea of a race to the bottom kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. But it's actually, I think the opposite has actually been true, is that people and the two licensees that we have now, which is Universal Audio and Waves, have done a very good job of emulating API products in plugins, and we have very strong input. We approve those products on the alpha and the beta versions before they get released. But in the long term, I think it has helped spur the sales of hardware, because people use software and go, yeah, this is really good, but I've been told the hardware is even better. And so I would like to say that we license those products with the caveat that you make it pretty good, you just don't make it exactly the same. Right. Well, although they do the best job, it's really good stuff.
Yeah. Well, so when I think about the way things used to be too, you used to have to be lucky enough to sort of have an opportunity to be in some studio one day, and then you see and you hear an API mic pre or one of the EQs, and you go, oh my God, that sounds incredible. And then you remember that until one day where you might get a chance to get one yourself. But it makes perfect sense. I mean, like everybody's can get access to the plugin and begin to get familiar with it and use it. But then it just gets you excited about wanting to get the actual analog gear.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so Roger Allen Nichols, his other part of the question was, he said, why did you discontinue the 8200A API line mixer?
Well, good question. There was a period of time when it appeared that those little sidecar mixers were popular, but the appeal and the sales of those things tailed off to the point at which you truly do every now and then have to take a look at your product line and go, what things are selling, what things are appealing to the customer, and what things are just kind of holding us down, or the production of it doesn't justify doing it anymore. And that line mixer was one of them, sadly.
Okay. Well, and then I think that part of the story Rockstars is that's the box is it's a level up from that, but I'm sure, but it is an opportunity to get all the features of a line mixer plus a whole lot more. Okay, so then here comes a question from Chris James, who was Prince's last engineer, actually. And Chris asked, well, he kind of prefaced it by saying Frank DiMedio built OEM consoles for Sunset Sound, for example, and used the 512s all the time. Chris uses the 512s all the time for tracking and loves them. And I guess his question was, he heard that there are things about voltage rails and stuff. So how important are voltage rails, and is there anything we want to know about that? Because obviously API is known for having the clarity and the punch, and that strikes me as being relevant somehow.
Well, voltage rails are important in that a clean power supply provides the best operating parameters for your electronics, and Frank DiMedio did in fact do a very fine job of taking API modules and putting them into a custom frame and making a console out of it, and they've been in use at Sunset for years and years. But I would say people sometimes say, well, isn't there a bit of a compromise between a module that's in a console that has a beefy power supply with lots of extra capacity, and a 500 series where have a fairly standard supply that runs 8 modules and not much more. When the truth is that the voltage rails are the same.
Right.
The same module that goes into a console goes into a lunchbox, and so you're not making any compromises by putting a module into a lunchbox.
Right on. And I will suggest this, Rockstars, a giant console power supply can be pretty noisy in your home studio, whereas a lunchbox is awfully quiet just sitting there.
That's right.
Yep. Makes it hard to record your vocal. Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. When you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then get started at ultimatemixingmasterclass.com. Okay, so here's another question from Mark Rubel. Actually, he pointed out, I forgot to mention this, but his telling me about the automating theatrical equipment. He also mentioned that API started out at a cocktail party. Do you know anything about that? That it was the idea for the theatrical automation was originally introduced at a cocktail party?
Well, I can't say I know that as a fact. However, I have no doubt that there were a number of API designs that were probably drawn on a cocktail napkin.
Oh, there you go. Well, that must have been a cocktail napkin. That's great. All right. And then let's see. He also asked about API's plans for the future. If you feel like you've already answered that, that's fine. We can move on. But if there's more you wanted to say about stuff coming in the future. And then I guess the extension of that question from Mark is, how do you bring new ideas to the classic legendary API sound?
Well, that is interesting in that, I don't think any of us here are geniuses with respect to the future, but we have regular skull sessions between engineering, sales, and service to talk about possible either revisions to current products or possible products that we could introduce in the future. And they become these rather informative skull sessions where, ideas are presented and then sales is given the task of sort of exploring to see if there's any interest.
Right.
Conversely, there are times when sales comes to those meetings and says, people would just love it if we had an X. And engineering goes, well, that'd be great, but man, we couldn't possibly build that. And so, it's a compilation of ideas and thoughts and customer feedback, and throw a piece of history in there that results in products that get developed or get modified from existing products that turn into products for the future.
Nice. All right, so we got 3 more questions and then we're done. This one comes in from Ryan Hewitt, a fantastic producer and engineer who's been on the show as well. And he said, his dad, David Hewitt, used an API for many years with the record plant truck.
Yes.
And it's currently getting a full renovation at the House of Blues. So Ryan's question is, why did the best recording trucks all seem to have API consoles?
Oh, I don't think there's any reason to explain that, is there?
There you go. Was there anything additional to that? Was there something about the size or shape that made it easy to do that as well?
Well, I think certain modularity helped.
Right.
You could build an API console pretty much any width that was necessary to fit into a truck.
Right.
And combined with the fact that when you're doing a live recording, it's the input channels are pretty easy to set up. They're very forgiving. You can really hit an input really hard without killing the audio. And so, it does for some reason, and I don't know that there's a scientific answer, but a number of recording trucks used APIs over the years, which was certainly before my time, but they certainly had a great reputation for being a great live console.
Yeah, and then Ryan went on to say, and then also Rockstar's David Hewitt has also been a guest on the show, so we'll try and see if we can include links to those in the show notes. But Ryan pointed out that, his dad had it said he had a 1991 all discrete console with pretty advanced digitally controlled busing structure in the remote recording service's Silver Truck, which is cool. All right, so here's another question. This one comes in from Megan Gohill. Actually, it's not a question. Megan just said, that's so cool that Larry, you were going to be on the show. I have no idea what I'd even ask him. I've done quite a few sessions where I've rented API gear, and they all sounded awesome, and I love the way they sound. So just shout out to you, Megan. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Megan.
And then this one is from Grant Walden, who's also been a guest on the show. He's down in Muscle Shoals now. And Grant says, what is one piece of API gear that other than a console that every recording studio should own, and why?
Well, these days, my vote would go for the 2500, which is now called the 2500 Plus stereo bus compressor. It's found its way into a very high number of studios and a number of live performance systems as well. Because it's just it's a really good stereo compressor.
Yeah,
it's whether you, as someone said, you just tickle it lightly, or you are really doing some serious compression. It's a great performer.
But there's more to that story, though, isn't there? Didn't you add? I'm just now remembering. Wasn't there a feature to the circuitry that you brought to the 2500?
We did, yeah. When we introduced the 50th anniversary 2500, we included a blend control that has a couple different operating parameters, which allows you to do compression and adjust the blend between the uncompressed signal and the compressed signal. So you can bring in the compressed signal into the uncompressed signal, or you can vary between compressed and uncompressed signal. So that's the reason for the plus, because we introduced that feature in the 50th anniversary series, and then upgraded the 2500 to include that feature.
Okay, I know what I was thinking of too, which is also the thrust circuit.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, what's that all about? Sounds exciting, but might be cool for a breakdown too.
Yeah, well, the thrust circuit is a carryover from a TI, which it was the Paragon Live console. The Paragon had a patented circuit in the compressor that does some patented things, and it worked really well. It was a great compressor for live because it was very forgiving, and yet it was very musical. And so we incorporated that thrust circuit into API products after I was able to acquire API. And at that point we renamed it and got it, applied for a trademark on the name Thrust, because it does the circuit does tend to sort of push the mix forward into your face and bring out the stuff that's important, if you will, in the mix.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's see here. We'll go to our closing question. Is there anything, first of all, Larry, that I forgot to bring up that you want to give you want to mention now?
Well,
we covered a lot, right?
We certainly did. We covered some ground, and it's really stretched my brain here a time or two to recall some of these facts. But the thing I would like to say is that I am deeply indebted to the employees of API.
Yeah.
They have a passion for what we do. And I tell you, when we have a product that's reviewed in a magazine, or if we're fortunate enough to get a cover of a magazine, I usually go around the building and show people that we've either gotten an article published or gotten a cover. And people really have a sense of pride that here's something they worked on, something that they had a hand in manufacturing that's helping other people's musical creativity. And I think that's a big deal.
That's cool. It sort of makes me want to think or ask you, what is it, who are you, and what is it? It's a big question, but actually it's a great song, right? But what is it about you that you feel like is a strength that allowed you to step in and take over a company like API Audio and grow it into what it is now, working with all these great people? How did you do something like that?
Well, it's a passion for music. It's an appreciation for the customer.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dedication to doing the best job we can do to produce the best products we can make. And that's been my focus from the beginning.
You talked about going to your staff, these great people that you get to work with, and bringing them the articles to show them the effect they're having. Is it kind of just, is there a definitive moment when you light up as a result of all this hard work you're doing? Is it just sort of like to see the smile on the face, to see the full circle connect with what you guys do and the results that it has in the world?
Yeah, there's a number of those, and I was been fortunate to sit on side stage and watch Stevie Wonder play for many years, so I don't get so starstruck anymore.
Right.
But the times when we either deliver a console to a rock star, to a musical star, or when we get accolades from those kinds of people, it's just a good feeling. That's what lights me up. That's what gives me a smile to say, here we are. Yeah. We're truly helping these people make a difference.
Yeah, that's great. Well, all right. So this is the final closing question, Larry. I like to ask it of all my guests. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you go back in time and you find young Larry Droppa. I don't know if you're playing in a band at this point or if you're starting to do some live sound, but you go back and give yourself a little bit of advice, and you say, listen, dude, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. And of course, your rock stardom, Larry, of the studio sort of is all encompassing because you're helping us all be rock stars of the studio. But what advice would you go back and give yourself, if you could rewind your career and go do that?
I think it would be appreciate the little stuff, because there are so many moments where you do things or you accomplish, you put some tracks down or you do a live mix or whatever, and I oftentimes didn't take the time to really drink that in at the time and go, man, I really did a good job here. It really made me feel good. Mm-hmm. And I at the time, I didn't appreciate them as much. And looking back on it now, I go, boy, I should have taken more time to appreciate that stuff.
Yeah, like how would you have known at the time that was such a special moment?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah.
And then also just maybe if you went back, you'd be like, dude, don't give up on radio so quickly.
No, I think that was a good decision.
Well, Larry, it's been an absolute pleasure hanging out with you. Thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. Rockstars, a reminder to you that, of course, we have a playlist in the show notes. We actually have some wonderful videos that really just kind of walk you through different aspects of API, as well as a music playlist. So you can just go check that out. And it's a bunch of records, I think, Larry, that you participated on at some point or API provided equipment for different recordings. And maybe we'll just expand on that as well moving forward. Okay. Please let the Rockstars know where they can find you online. Where would you like them to go? What if they're ready to go ahead and jump right in and get the new Vision console?
Well, first off, you go to apiaudio.com. And if you're ready to make the leap, I truly, from a mic preamp up to a big console, there's a link to a number of people in sales who would be happy to help you, guide you through the process. We also do now, right now, we have virtual console demonstrations and the equipment demonstrations. We do this from right here because we've been shut out from trade shows this year. So we have a studio set up here, and we can lead you start to finish through a console if you'd like.
That's so cool. And then, just as I'm thinking about it too, I guess we didn't talk about it this way, but our customer experience can be modular. I mean, you can literally start with a lunchbox, get some mic pre's, and then when you move to a box, for example, you can take those same mic pre's and they can become part of a console, and you can kind of build and grow that way as well.
That's right.
So very cool. Well, Larry, thank you again so much for joining us in Recording Studio Rockstars. Thanks everybody for listening. And I look forward to having another in-person event whenever we're all doing that again, because NAMM and seeing you guys with your booth is a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, Lige. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure, Larry. Thanks so much for joining us. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. Sound Porter Mastering, OWC, Atom Audio, API Audio, Spectra 1964, Isotope, and JZ Microphones. Remember to get your free mastering demo at soundporter.com and use the coupon code ROCK10 at Isotope for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your 7-day free subscription trial to get access to lots of their plugins. friends. And use the coupon code ROCKSTARS at jzmike.com for 20% off this very pop filter you're hearing right now for a limited time. You will find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, Hugh McDonald, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. You guys rock. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.